Return to Ithaca. He suddenly awoke to find that it was daylight and that the rocking of the boat had stopped. He was all alone on a sandy beach, and the chest full of gifts lay beside him. His heart sank. It seemed he had been abandoned on some unknown shore. Then, as his eyes took in the surroundings, his heart leaped with joy. The beach was at the head of a natural harbor enclosed within tall cliffs. Above the beach, the entrance to a cave was partially concealed by an ancient olive tree. Odysseus knew this place well. The cave was sacred to the naiads, nymphs of the rivers and springs, who sat inside it and wove their purple cloths on the banks of ever flowing streams. The harbor was sacred to the old sea god Phorcys, father in law of Poseidon. But Odysseus had no fear of Poseidon here, nor would the curse of Polyphemus ever trouble him again, for he was standing on dry land, and the sand beneath his feet was the sand of Ithaca, his home. He fell to his knees and kissed the ground, soaking it with tears. He did not see the goddess Athene appear at his side. "Dear Odysseus, welcome home at last," said the goddess, smiling down at him. "It is good that you should ease your heart with tears. But calm yourself now and listen to me carefully, for your troubles are far from over." Odysseus grew pale, and a thousand anxious thoughts flashed through his mind. "Divine Athene, daughter of great Zeus, please tell me the worst at once. I need to know. Has cruel fate snatched my wife or son before my return? Or have I been betrayed by those I love? Does some stranger wallow in my bed and sit in stolen splendor on my throne?" The goddess placed a soothing hand on his shoulder. "No, dear Odysseus. Your wife and son still loyally long for your return, but there are plenty of others who wish you dead, and it is them you have to fear. 4 years ago now, the lords of Ithaca and nearby lands decided to give you up for dead. They agreed among themselves to compete for the hand of your wife Penelope. You know well enough that she is held to be the loveliest woman, next to Helen herself, in the whole of Greece. Of course, few could hope to win the prize, but many others have taken the opportunity to live in idle luxury at your expense. There are plenty of pretty serving maids to amuse them, and they have eaten their way through your flocks and herds and drunk their way through your cellars without a single thought to the future. For the suitors in your palace every day is a feast day. They are like a swarm of locusts. Unless Penelope chooses a new husband, they have threatened to stay where they are until your cellars are empty and your fields are bare. Worse still, the suitors have already decided to kill your son, Telemachus, and share the kingdom out among themselves. With my help, Athene continued, you will make sure that evil day never comes. Dearest of men, remember how I once stood by you on the dusty plains of Troy. In the thickest of the bloody battle, I, Athene, protected you and gave you strength. For your wisdom and your cunning, for your courage and your beauty, you have long been my favorite among mortals. For almost 10 years now, I have been forced to stand by helplessly while my uncle, Poseidon, has pursued you across the seas. But I always knew you would survive and come home at last. Now that you are here, I shall help you once again. But you must be patient and you must be cunning. First, I will disguise you as an old beggar. Then go to your swineherd, Emaeus. He is as loyal as ever. But don't tell him you are here, who you are. It's safer that way. Meanwhile, I will go to Sparta, where your son has gone to visit Menelaus, hoping to receive news of you. He must return, now that you are here. The suitors plan to ambush him, but I will make sure that he is safe. Quickly now, let us hide your chest of treasures in the Naiads' cave before we go our separate ways. When the chest was safely stowed away, the goddess touched Odysseus with her wand. His thick black hair suddenly turned thin and gray, and his eyes dimmed. In exchange for Eret's fine purple tunic, Athene gave him a cloak that was tattered and torn. Pleased with her work, she watched the stiff old beggar make his way inland. Then she set off for Sparta to find his son. Odysseus and the Swineherd. Odysseus climbed up from the beach and followed an old overgrown path through the woods. He had no need for directions. These were the woods and hills where he had played as a child and hunted wild boar as a young man. It was here in the early summer that he used to gather wild strawberries while with his mother's maids. But it was the late summer that he liked best, when after weeks of suffocating heat, there were nights of rain. He would go out alone in the early morning mist that hung magically waist high above the ground to meet the dryads under the dripping branches. These woodland nymphs became his friends. They taught him the names of the flowers, trees, and birds, and showed him which of the myriad mushrooms that sprang up were poisonous, and which were succulent and good to eat. Odysseus knew these woods so well that he recognized every tree. The path was steep and uneven, but he never faltered. It was only in appearance that Athene had changed him into an old beggar. Underneath, he was as strong as ever. Besides, each step he took gave him pleasure, for he was treading on his beloved Ithacan soil. In the early afternoon, he came out of the woods onto the open hills. Soon, he could make out wisps of black smoke curling up over the swineherd's cottage. He hurried forward. It was exactly as he remembered from 20 years earlier. Every stone, every fence post was in its proper place, and even the animals grazing in the paddock looked the same. But as he came closer, four vicious looking dogs rushed toward him, fangs bared. Suddenly, a familiar voice shouted above their bloodthirsty barking, commanding them to stop. The dogs slunk away from Odysseus, growling, disappointed. A man came running toward him. It was his swineherd, Eumaeus, and Odysseus was shocked to see the careworn face, which made him look older than his years. "Old man, forgive me," said Eumaeus. "I was busy cleaning out the sties with my men and didn't see you coming. I hate to keep these vicious hounds, but these are the times we live in. My master, Odysseus, has been gone these 20 years now, and things are going from bad to worse. The palace is full of dissolute lords, and the young prince Telemachus can't control them. All kinds of unpleasant men have come to Ithaca, and gangs roam the countryside to see what they can scrounge or steal. But enough of that. Come inside and let's see what I can offer you." Eumaeus led Odysseus into his cottage and made him sit before the fire. Then he fetched a jug of rough red wine and a freshly slaughtered young hog, which he spitted expertly and placed over the flames to roast. "May Zeus reward you," said Odysseus as soon as Eumaeus sat down, "for your generous welcome to a wretched old beggar." "Old friend," he replied, the swineherd, "it's the will of Zeus that we should take in whoever comes to our door in peace, especially those in need. And I can see that you've fallen on hard times. But instead of listening to my sorrows, which begin and end with the loss of dear Odysseus, my lord, tell me about yourself. Who are you? Where do you come from? And what brings you to this troubled land?" Although it was only mid-afternoon, it was as dark as night in the windowless cottage. The two men sat close together in the flickering light of the fire. The wood smoke and the scent of the roasting pork made Odysseus's eyes and mouth water as he told Eumaeus his story. Odysseus claimed to be a Cretan prince. As a young man, he had won fame and fortune on the high seas. Then the call came to go to Troy. He joined the Achaean army with 9 ships under his command, and throughout those 10 years of war, he stood shoulder to shoulder with Odysseus and the rest of them. But on the voyage home, everything had gone wrong. He lost his entire fleet and all of the treasures he had won. He himself was captured, and years of slavery followed, first in Egypt and then in Phoenicia. Now, at long last, he had been set free, but he would not return to Crete in shame and had resolved to wander the world as a beggar until he died. "If only I could reward your hospitality with good news of your beloved master, my old friend Odysseus," he said as he ended his tale. "But I've heard nothing since we parted on the shores of Troy." "It doesn't matter, old friend," replied Eumaeus, his eyes filling with tears. "I fear Odysseus died long ago, although I still pray for his return. But it does me good to speak of him and entertain his friend." Dusk had fallen while the two men talked. Now they heard the squeals and grunts of the swine being herded into their pens for the night. Soon, Eumaeus's 4 herdsmen came and joined them by the fire. While they devoured the remains of the roast pork, Eumaeus went to the sties and brought out the finest of all of his hogs. He wanted to make a sacrifice to Zeus and to honor his guests. The herdsmen were weary from the day's work, but they sat up late that night, enjoying the delicious meat and the entrancing stories that Eumaeus and the stranger took turns telling in the flickering shadows of the hearth. When Eumaeus spoke of the suitors, bitter anger grew in Odysseus's heart, but he said nothing, and it was easy to hide his feelings in the dimly lit room. It was past midnight now, and in spite of the fire, a chill had penetrated the cottage. Outside, the west wind whistled over the hills, driving an icy rain from off of the sea. The feast was over, and the men were ready to sleep. Wrapped only in threadbare rags, Odysseus began shivering. Before we sleep, he said, as the men began to get up, there's one more story I wish to tell. It concerns your noble king Odysseus and illustrates that quick-witted cunning that convinces me he's still alive. Unless the gods have destroyed him, he will surely return, for no mortal could outwit him. We're all tired, so I'll be brief. One night, we crept across the dusty plains of Troy and hid in the reeds outside the city walls, ready to ambush the Trojan troops when they came out the following day. Odysseus, Menelaus, and myself led a party of 100 men. We made ourselves as comfortable as we could in our heavy armor on the marshy ground, but the night was cold, the north wind blew, and snow began to fall. I realized to my horror that I'd forgotten my cloak. Dressed only in armor and my scanty tunic, I wouldn't survive the night. I turned to Odysseus, who lay beside me, to tell him of my plight. My lips were already blue with cold. Without a moment's hesitation, he spoke to our men. Dear friends, we've managed to get here without being seen. Now someone must slip back to the camp to tell Agamemnon so that he's ready to draw the Trojans into our trap as soon as morning comes. Even before he'd finished speaking, Thoas, the best runner among us, leaped up and volunteered. He pulled off his purple cloak and let it fall to the ground as he ran off through the snow. Now I had a thick woolen cloak to keep me warm, and so I survived the night. Eumaeus chuckled softly. Dear friend, your tale was well told, and the point hasn't escaped me. Here, take my spare cloak. It'll keep you warm enough if you lie down on the goatskins by the fire. My men will stay here with you. I prefer to sleep outside in the old barn by the sties in case there are any unwelcome visitors in the night. Eumaeus wrapped himself up well, and as Odysseus watched him go, he felt a surge of warmth for this man who loved his lord so well.